All right, onward. We're turning a corner in this session as we go into the second half of the letter. You know, Paul wrote a lot of complicated things, but God bless him for writing one letter that at least has a nice, clear structure and flow of thought. So just to kind of sum up big picture, the first half of the letter, remember that we began and ended with a hymn of praise, a poetic act of praise to the one who saved us from the powers. Inside of that were two prayer reports. It's both a worship meeting and a prayer meeting that we're invited to in Ephesians. Remember here Paul was praying that we would continue to undergo the apocalypse of the revealing, seeing the true nature of reality, which is that the Messiah is king over heaven and earth. Here it was a prayer that we could together grasp new dimensions of the Messiah's love for his people. And together. That was the big part of that discussion in the last session, was that it's something that we can do together in ways that we cannot do by ourselves. Even though I assume we should do that by ourselves too. Inside of that were two essays, but they take on narrative form. You remember these two halves of chapter 2 was telling a story of y'all's situation. Remember who the y'all is? Predominantly is non-Israelites who have been incorporated into the family of Abraham through the Messiah. So he tells the story of the Gentiles' past, rescue, and incorporation into the family of God as new humans. It's like a cosmic perspective. Then he retells the same story from a different angle, specifically of alienation from the covenant family of Abraham to full members of the Abrahamic family in the Messiah. This was matched by an essay Paul wrote about himself, where if y'all went from imprisonment to the powers into freedom, Paul has gone from freedom as a Roman citizen into imprisonment on behalf of the very message that frees others is what imprisons him. There's this inversion between those two. And then at the very center we saw the planting of a messianic building tree temple in which we all are stones, growing. The building keeps growing. What an image. Right at the center. What a masterpiece. Holy cow. Like, just what a exquisite. So as we turn the corner, what we're going to find is Paul is going to explore imaginatively what it could look like to actually live as if chapters 1 through 3 are true. When you hit the boldness of the invasion of new creation into the present age, when that strikes you in all of its power, it's a mind bender, because it's asking us to create new categories for a whole vision of reality, of what physical reality is, of what my relationship to every other kind of human being is, my relationship to power structures. Everything changes. And so in 4 through 6, he's going to, you could call them moral exhortations, but as we're going to see, it's full of as much metaphor and imagery and creative symbolism as chapters 1 through 3. He's creating new categories for human existence, and to do that, you need imagination. Like, your imagination has to be reborn. One of the great gifts that we can be given to fire our imagination is when we encounter works of art that don't fit any previous categories we had about what a work of art is. There's two British artists whose work I came across in the early 2000s. Their names are Tim Noble and Sue Webster. If you Google them, just beware. Not everything they do is very as tasteful as you might prefer. But they did one whole series, a statue series in the early 2000s. It kind of gave them international notoriety, It's called the Shadow series. So for example, you'd walk into a room and you'd come from behind and, you'd be like, oh, it's going to be one of these art exhibits. You're just like, what is this? Like shot up cans, and trash. You're like, I knew I'm not smart enough to get art or something. I don't know what. But having entered the gallery room from behind, when you walk around, and the door's over here, so you have to walk through the room to get to it. There's a spotlight shining from this angle, and what the shadow of this mess on the table casts onto the wall, you couldn't see it when you first came in. You have to walk halfway through the room. Then once you see the shadow cast on the wall, you're just like, that's so clever. Yeah. So you walk into another room, and you're coming around, and what you see is a heap of trash. And if you're staring at the heap of trash, it's mostly fast food, junk food waste. You'd see this on any alley or street, right? Spilling over in many cities in the world. And then you get around to the right angle of the room, and you see Tim Noble and Sue Webster lying in the trash. Now here's what is interesting about this piece is it's both about perception. The angle of the light helps you see things that you couldn't otherwise have seen. But then the thing that it helps you see prompts you towards a whole new vision of reality about how you think about people in relation to trash, or how you might actually perceive people as trash, especially the kind of people that you might see laying in a spot like that in an alley with the trash. And then all of a sudden I think they mean us, to undergo some serious self-examination about how I perceive other people's value and why it is that I would think that somebody is like trash because they don't have an apartment to sleep in. Why? That's so arbitrary. Why would I make that value judgment? So this one's entertaining. This one opens up something about the human condition. Let me go back here. What Tim Noble and Sue Webster are giving us is an apocalypse. Right? Remember how apocalypse language and events in the biblical story are often associated with light. That light casts a new perspective on something, and then all of a sudden, a whole new reality opens up, things you've never thought to imagine. What Paul meets on the road to Damascus is a reality that's been there all along, but he never had eyes to see it until the uncovering or until the revealing. This series really captured my imagination for the same reason that it sparks your imagination. And I think there's some real analogy here to all this apocalyptic language that Paul's getting at. And what he's going to do for us in chapters 4 through 6 isn't simply telling you what to do. Here's what God did, now here's what you do. That's true on a very basic level. But what he says in chapters 4 through 6 doesn't exhaust the possibilities opened up by chapters 1 through 3. They're the things that he felt, guided by the Spirit, this either church in Ephesus, or churches in Ephesus, or churches up and down the valley. They're the things that he felt they needed to hear. And the Spirit clearly thought we all needed to overhear what he said to those churches. But what those do is spark our imagination to walk into new rooms where Paul hasn't told us what to do in this scenario. How do you make sense of this? What is the Spirit up to bringing order and beauty out of this? And so think of this as a metaphor for your own ministry context. It might actually feel like that, or your own life. And what are the possibilities that you haven't even thought to think of with the people around you, especially the people that you don't like, because apparently there's something really important about the people that you don't like in your community or family. There's some unique opportunity there. Chapters 4 through 6 are as much about imagining the new creation in the real concrete setting of our individual lives. And if we're asking that question, I think we'll notice some things that maybe we wouldn't have noticed otherwise in Ephesians 4 through 6.
Being in family ministry, it's important to recognize that the trash or the craziness that you think you see on the front of teenagers and kids and all that God really does work and shine a light in the midst of that it is, at least my call as a pastor, to see them for who they are and the beauty that God is working in them, even in the mix of the crazy and the mess. So that's a wonderful analogy of wasted youth.
Paul's going to talk about some of the important leadership gifts given, So he doesn't name like the spiritual gift of the apocalyptic imagination. But in a way, it undergirds everything, because it's imagining on other people's behalf what they can't even see in themselves and what they are capable of as a community.
Well, that's what Jesus has done for me.
Yeah, that's right.
When you said apocalypse, when it happens, should capture us, I immediately went to we are slaves to Messiah, right? So if we're captured by this apocalyptic state, going with that whole motif of being a slave to Christ, everything we do is going to change if he's our master.
Yeah, and even this is a different metaphor, but related, where he calls himself a prisoner. In Greek, he says a prisoner of Messiah Jesus. I'm pretty sure you're a Roman prisoner right now, and that there's a centurion outside your door. Yeah. Not in his imagination. Yeah, you get it. Yeah. I mean, you could accuse a guy of living in La La Land, and a lot of people probably did. But he was convinced they're the ones in La La Land. They're the ones not living in reality.